Okay, so once again, the YouTube people could not listen to the introduction before. Yes, I'm glad to present today the work in progress of my Juan de la Cierva Fellowship, which is finished 1 week ago. So yeah, this is a work in progress, but I will be happy to get your questions, feedback, or any comments. So what I've been doing here is to work on data integrated lithospheric-scale models, aiming to take it further from not only tectonic applications, but also geohazards and georesources. For that, yeah, so why should we really care about the lithosphere and the thermal structures? There are like many diverse applications in which both play a key role, starting from lithospheric deformation, oil and gas exploration, geothermal energy, also mineral exploitation. Believe it or not, the stability of gas hydrates in the long term also react to the condition of the lithosphere and thermal structures, and also the ice sheet dynamics. In today's talk, I'm going to focus on these two main applications, which are lithospheric deformation and geothermal energy. And in order to do this, we also need to take into account that the rheology of rocks are the primary factor to understand deformation. And in this case, there are like a broad spectrum of factors that play an important role in the definition of the rheology of rocks. And today's talk, I'm going to focus on temperature, and in particular, because this exerts a primary role in rocks mechanics. So in this diagram, you can see the seismogenic zone defined like in the upper part by the brittle behavior of rocks, meaning that the rocks can actually fracture and develop earthquakes. And here in the lowermost, we have the transition to more ductile behavior, meaning that the rocks will deform in a different way. So this rheological behavior is responsible of this spatial distribution of earthquake. In this case, the earthquake frequency. You can see that most earthquakes are nucleating here in the seismogenic zone, and less events tend to nucleate in the brittle ductile transition and below. And here, temperature is important because as we increase the depth, temperature will also increase, but it's not as simple as that because, of course, there are some heterogeneities in the system, so we should consider the feedback between the different lithospheric units. In order to explore all these let's say, variables that I've been describing before, I wanted to focus in Central and Southern California, where the San Andreas fault here in this blue line represents the present-day boundary between the Pacific and North American plates. In this region, we have a very heterogeneous lithospheric structure, which implies that we have not only a broad spatial distribution on seismicity, but we also have let's say, heterogeneous off-fault deformation rates, which is the map that I'm showing here. Off-fault deformation rates means that it's the deformation that remains after removing what is due to the fault, right? In this region, we have a wealth of geophysical data, including diverse community models. So this is an important factor for the goals that I have. Because it means that San Andreas and Southern California are a perfect natural laboratory to explore the relationships between the lithosphere and the thermal state. And not only that, you can see here in this map, especially in Western US and in the study region, we have, let's say, spatially distributed geothermal potential, which is not homogeneous. So we wanted to understand, okay, what is the control of this heterogeneous lithospheric structure in terms of lithology, thermal properties, and mantle contribution on the present-day thermal field in this area. and how does this thermal field vary spatially and at depth, and which are the implications of this heterogeneous thermal structure, not only for the deformation patterns, but also how can we explain this spatial distribution, the geothermal potential. So in order to do that, I work with these data integrated models in which diverse data sets have been integrated in a consistent way, from topography down to 75 kilometers depth, to 70 kilometers depth. Here I'm showing you the total sediment thickness map for the continent. So we are capturing the spatial variation of main depositors, such as the Great Valley, but also small basins here in the basin and range area. And regarding the crystalline crust, I am working with these heterogeneous terrains coming from the community rheology model. The good part of this community model is that they have a very integrated, very detailed lithology regarding all of these terrains. So you can see here a diagram showcasing how each of these terrains are associated with different compositions. So we are taking into account felsic, intermediate, and basic rocks. And why is this important? Because when we are computing the three-dimensional thermal field, we are actually following geology-based thermal properties for each of these terrains and for each of the lithologies associated to these terrains. So we have a pretty, let's say, a model that is pretty consistent with geology in the region, and we follow a finite element mesh let's say, framework with the software golem and compute the three-dimensional steady-state thermal field. So in order to compute this, we need boundary conditions. In this case, the upper boundary are the temperatures over the continent, and the lower boundary are the temperatures at 70 kilometers depth following a petrophysical inversion. So it means that for this inversion, we take into account the tomography data in order to capture the again, the geology that remains in the mantle. So here you see the temperature in my lower boundary. It's heterogeneous. You see the colder regions here associated with the ocean, but also here we have the Isabella high velocity anomaly, which is a fragment of this fossil Monterey microplate, which was subducting here 30 million years ago. So we have this, you see in this tomographic cube, this low velocity, this high velocity body, which corresponds to this fossil slab. So we are actually capturing this geologic feature in our lower boundary condition. So let's go to the results. Here in this map, you see the temperature at 10 kilometers depth. You can already see the first order control that the thickness of the crystalline crust has on this temperature, because places where we get highest temperature correlate with places with thicker crystalline crust, which is expected because we have an increased regenerative heat production in thick crystalline crust regions. But not only that, another example of the results that we can obtain from this approach are, for example, the temperature at the basement. So the temperature below the sediments. This is an important parameter that can be used for georesources, for example, for oil and gas models or for geothermal models. And you can see here that we are actually able to capture this variation on the basement temperature as a response also of the sediment thickness that we are taking into account in our approach. Another important factor that should be taken into account is the thermal blanketing effect of the sediments. Here you see the temperature at -10 kilometers depth. Here I am highlighting the regions where we are matching some of these depot centers. And what we can see already is that there are some first order control of having hotter temperatures underneath these basins. And it's because the sediments have a low thermal conductivity, meaning that the heat cannot escape very easily from deep in the earth to the surface. And this thermal blanketing effect can also affect the surface heat flow observations. Here, I am showing you the surface heat flow values in the region. And in this diagram to the right, you see the surface heat flow against the sediment thickness at each location. What we can already see here is at least two clusters of these, let's say, points. On the first hand, we have where the sediment thickness is important. We tend to have low surface heat flow observations. However, here more to the right, we have higher surface heat flow observations. And these locations have associated less, let's say, a decrease in the sediment thickness. So this is very important because when you are modeling geothermal potential, for example, you should not just take into account the extrapolation of this surface heat flow observation as 1D geotherms to compute the thermal field. So you really need to take into account the heterogeneities of the properties of the different lithologies that you have in the system. So in this diagram, I am showing you so let me go back. So for the geothermal exploration, especially for deep geothermal, the deep to the 150 degrees isotherm is a very important proxy. In this diagram, I am showing you these contours are the deep to the 150 degree isotherm for two different cases. In this case, for sediment, for the thermal conductivity of sediments, 1.27, and in this case, a bit higher thermal conductivity of 2. And here you see in the x-axis the sediment thickness and the y-axis the surface heat flow. So if we have a look, for example, here, a surface heat flow of 80 and a sediment thickness of 1, we will expect to have the dip to the 150 degrees isotherm at about 4.5 kilometers. However, if we increase the thermal conductivity of the sediments, meaning that we allow the heat to escape more efficiently from the system, actually the depth to the isotherm will increase to 4.2. And so why is that? It's because, as I mentioned before, you can see in this diagram, underneath the sedimentary basins, these sediments with low thermal conductivities will not allow the heat to escape. And then we will have an increase or a shallowing of the isotherms. And this is the reason why a data integrative approach is a very important way of computing the not only geothermal potential, but in general, the thermal field, because it helps in reducing the uncertainties in the surface heat flow observations, but also we take into account the complete, let's say, three-dimensional heterogeneities of the system. So here in this map, you see the dip to the 150 degrees isotherm as computed from our model. You can already more or less see that it has a fork-like structure that goes like this, with yellow colors, meaning shallower depths. And here, these blue contours correspond to topography. So light blues are highest elevations. And what we can see compared with the surface heat flow observation is that we have also increased surface heat flow measurements here, particularly here in Sierra Nevada and here more to the rift in the south. And if we compare this dip to the isotherm with the geothermal potential, we can also see the geothermal potential and also the geothermal wells, which are these yellow dots. We can see that it follows a similar trend, this fork-like trend. So coming back to the temperature in our model here, I'm showing you the temperature at 10 kilometers. Maybe you can see more clear the fork-like structure I mentioned before. And here I am comparing it with the off-fault moment rate as mentioned in the introduction. What we see is that the hottest domains in our model actually showcase a quite nice fit with these deformation rates from GPS inversion. And if we focus in this area, which is the Sierra Nevada origin, and here the Walker Lane terrain, this region actually accommodates about 20% of the deformation between the Pacific and North America plate motion. Why is this important? Is because previous works have suggested that in this region, the crustal blocks might undergo non-brittle deformation, meaning that something should be happening there because we have a lot of deformation, but we are not accommodating that with faults. So something is going on. And according to our model, we have hot regions in this area, meaning that pointing towards a weak crust, therefore able to accommodate a strain in a non-brittle way. Actually, if we have a look at these diagrams here, these are like in the orange bars are the unfold component of the deformation. So here, corresponding to northern San Andreas, and this diagram to southern San Andreas. But if we move towards the continent, to the region where we have an important about 20% component of this deformation being accommodated there, we move to the Eastern California shear zone in this case, and here to the Walker Lane. We see that this unfold component, which are the blue columns, this component increases compared to the off-fold compared to the on-fold component. So this means that when we go a bit towards the continent, the off-fold component is more important in relation with what is happening here along the San Andreas Fault. And sorry. More recent studies, in this case, for you to have the spatial location. This is like 38 degrees north. So it's a bit here, the northern part of my model. And it goes, this to the area goes a bit more to the north. However, this area is called Northern and Central Walker Lane, which corresponds to this terrain that I'm pointing here, and Sierra Nevada, which is the place where we have the hottest temperatures. So they also perform GPS modeling and found that in this area, there is a spatially distributed shear zone in the lower crust that is bounded by these two polygons that are here in yellow. So if we go a bit more toward the south, we find here the southern Walker Lane, so the southward continuation of this structure. What is important to point here is that according to this inversion, what they found is that the faults might terminate near the bottom of the upper crust. So the faults are not actually cutting the entire crust, but they are actually seated above a broadly distributed shear zone. So how can we explain this shear zone? We do need to have increased temperatures in order to allow the rocks to deform in this more like ductile behavior. And in the top, we have the rocks deforming in a more brittle way. As you can see here, these are the earthquakes. So in California, as I mentioned before, we have a diverse community models that have been developed. And one of these models are the community thermal models. So people might ask, okay, but they already have a community thermal model. Why are you developing a new model, right? And it's because you see here, this is one community model by Shinevar et al. 2018, and this is another community model by Thatcher and Chapman 2020. And their approach is to rely on this extrapolation of 1D geotherms based on surface heat flow observation. As I showed you before, these observations may be related with diverse uncertainties, including the thermal blanketing effect of the sediments. So what they did was to, for example, in the case of Thatcher and Chapman, they computed average surface heat flow for certain regions, so these black polygons. They computed the average surface heat flow. With this average, they extrapolated the 1D geotherms for each of these terrains. So this is the reason why you see here such sharp boundaries for these temperature estimates, right? A similar approach has been followed by Shinevar in 2018. So yes, in my case, I wanted to explore the full three-dimensional heterogeneity following this data integrative approach and not relying just on the extrapolation of 1D geotherms. So when we compare our results with the previous community models, we see that we are actually obtaining opposite trends, right? So for example, here, this is Southern Sierra Nevada and Walker Lane, which corresponds to this area here. Actually, according to this community model, it should have cold temperatures compared to the surroundings. And this is not what we obtain in our model, right? However, as you may recall from previous slides, we are talking here about broad shear zones, let's say high rates of off-fault deformation. How can we explain this off-fault deformation and shear zones with such cold temperatures? So with these cold temperatures, one will expect to have rocks deforming in a more brittle way. And this is not what let's say external data, GPS inversions, are telling us, right? So yes, community thermal models barely explain the shear zone and also the geothermal potential that we have in the study area, because actually here, the places where there is a lot of geothermal potential, according to the community thermal models, we have cold domains, right? Okay, so the final exercise I wanted to explore was to model the hypocentral temperatures. In this case, I'm taking advantage again of the California, because they have a beautiful catalog of events that have been relocated following a three-dimensional, let's say, lithospheric structure. So these hypocenters, yes, they still have some errors, but they have a high resolution, they are a high resolution data set. And here you can see that we have a broad spectrum of temperatures at which earthquakes are nucleating. Here, again, in Southern Sierra Nevada and the transition to Walker Lane, is the place where we get the hottest hypocenters. But let's have a look at this in a different way. Here is a bit more difficult to observe. So here in this upper panel, you see the histogram of hypocentral temperatures. Here in the lower panel, you see the hypocentral temperatures against the hypocentral depths. And here, these dots correspond to the seismic events color-coded according to their magnitude, right? And here, these color, let's say, panels in the background correspond to the seismogenic window of different minerals and rocks expected both at the cross and the mantle. So here you see granite and gabbro, olivine and granite, and so on. So first, we already observed that earthquakes are not equally frequent at different temperature ranges. So we have let's say, a spectrum of temperatures at which earthquakes are nucleating. However, previous studies in the area have suggested that the 350 degrees isotherm might define the seismogenic depth in California. So we are pretty much in agree with them. However, we think that maybe the 400 degrees, which is the peak of the granite damage, might be a more solid boundary for this transition. Okay, coming to this panel, we see a grain for one depth. We actually obtain a broad temperature range at which earthquakes are nucleating. This will not be possible to observe if we relied on 1D geotherms, which are extrapolating at depth. So it means that we're actually able to capture this three-dimensionality in our system. Another important observation here is that there is a drop, really like a drastic drop in earthquake occurrence at about 800 degrees Celsius. And this might be due to the fact of the seismogenic window that has been obtained in laboratory experiments, which suggests that crustal rocks might nucleate between, might have a seismic behavior between 350 degrees isotherm plus minus 50, and for ultramafic rocks, so meaning rocks more like similar to mantle, at 700 plus minus 100. So we might be actually be able to capture this transition. So that's why I'm mentioning here, this is an attempt of scaling the frictional behavior of from laboratory experiments. However, here at temperatures larger than 1000 degrees Celsius, when we enter highly unknown conditions, because laboratory experiments are very, very difficult to perform at such high temperatures. So yes, the final observation here is that at depths larger than 30, more or less, we are also having a drop in earthquake occurrence, meaning that we have, and also the events that are occurring here are really small magnitude events, meaning that in the lower crust and mantle, we might have weak but still frictional rock able to deform with earthquakes. So just to finalize here the take-home message, yes, why is it important to take into account this data integrative approach? It's because they can be used for diverse geophysical applications. In this case, we were able to capture the first order control on the geothermal potential in Western US. Regarding the formation, we actually found that the hottest domains in our models especially correlate with higher off-fault deformation rates. It has important implications because we have previous work suggesting broad shear zones, let's say broadly distributed in these hot areas, meaning that we have hot and weak crust able to accommodate strain in a non-brittle way. And this has important implications for the future development of the future Pacific North America plate boundary, because many authors have been suggesting that it's actually migrating towards this area along the Walker Lane and Sierra Nevada. We also explored the model hypocentral temperatures, and in general, they agree with previous experiments of rock friction. Last but not least, the thermal blanketing effect is a really important process that one should take into account when modeling the thermal field, meaning that we cannot rely just in the surface heat flow observations to compute the thermal structure, because of course the effect of the sediments not allowing the heat to escape easily might tend to get, let's say, wrong results if we don't follow this data integrative approach. Thank us a lot for your attention. Paula, ¿cómo veo si hay comentarios en YouTube? Vale. Vale.
I would like to ask you, maybe you were showing it. Did you show the crustal thicknesses of that area? Can you show the growth diagram, please, again?
Yes, yes. Oh, it's a bit far away. Maybe we just go faster. Here. This map.
So the thicknesses are, let's say, are thick, no? They go to 35.
Yes, yes, we do have a deep mojo here in these regions. Yes, yes.
Whereas towards the coast, where the falls are, it's much less.
It's less, yes, exactly.
Well, I'm asking this because maybe you know that we have been doing a section in the northeast of Spain where the Transvet Falls and the La Garrocha system. And one of our questions was, we had the falls very well, clearly imaging the field and the system in the cover, but then how to continue these falls into the lower crust. And I think that you have been showing more or less what's happening then.
Yes, but in your case, you mean in the study area here in Spain. So the question is, how should you, well, actually, I don't know if Coafi has this deep and depth of the faults, the Coafi data set.
So you're asking me.
Yes, because you are the expert in Coafi. I am not the expert in Coafi. But are they quaternary faults or older?
Well, they are different. So they are in between 15 or 20 million years and less.
Yeah, so no, Coafi will not work there. Yeah.
But we have the earthquakes at Jordan. So we see that the earthquakes go down to 15 kilometers more or less. It's very similar to where.
Yes. Yes.
And then what we did is to continue the faults in discontinuous, let's say, but we know that there is a kind of two-time deformation.
Yes. Yes, yes, exactly. So the question is if they really reach the base of the lower crust or not, then you need other proxies to continue them down to the lower crust. Yeah.
You look at the thermal aspect of lithospheric location? You
Yeah.
examine strain rates, or
Sorry, again?
you only look at the thermal aspect of an earthquake lithocenter? What about strain rates, or you?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because actually the next step should be to develop a rheological model using this thermal field. So yeah, that's the idea we have, to be able to, the same way we have here the temperature and how it varies spatially and at depth, we would like to use this data to have to build a rheological model, and then we will be able to get more insights on the formation and a more like rheology process. Not at this point, no, but in the future, yes.
And your geothermal gradient is obviously not linear, huh?
My geothermal gradient?
Is obviously not linear.
No, it's not linear. It's not linear. Actually, the geothermal gradient, it's a pretty challenging, I will say, parameter, because it's really a function of which depths you are taking into account. So in a previous work I did in the Caribbean, I was computing the geothermal potential using different depth ranges, and it was amazing how it changes really with depth. So it's really sensitive to these temperature ranges that you use to compute it.
And one last question. For your crystalline crust, I guess the mobile, have you looked at the mobile temperatures?
Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, not here, but yes, it's pretty easily for me to get the Moho temperature out of the model, but no, I don't have a map here. Yeah, sorry.
Model using PN waves, refractive wave at the base
Yeah.
of the crust.
But what is the question, sorry?
No, I'm just saying that for the mobile temperatures, there's a very good model for this area using PN waves.
The Moho temperatures, really?
Yes.
Oh.
There's a very good relationship between PN velocity and temperature.
Yes, no, actually that's the petrophysical inversion that I'm using here is it's performed by the team Javier Fullea at the Universidad Complutense de Madrid. They are following a pretty robust framework to convert velocities in general. They use Rayleigh love velocities into temperatures. But I am not aware of this. If I understand you correctly, there is actually a model estimating Moho temperatures here, right?
This is using PN velocity.
Okay, no, I am not aware of that. Maybe we can talk later, and yeah, it will be nice to get the references of that. Thank you. And YouTube?
I'm just very any other place with to explore the same, you see the same pattern of temperature, for example, or especially in those zones with whole deformation and the implications for geothermal fields, or even in the regional tectonics.
Would you say like other, let's say, papers where they have explored the relationship between temperature and fault deformation in the world?
To validate or to compare with this pattern you observe here.
Well, I think up to now, I am not aware of any other paper in this region or any other place correlating the temperature and the fault deformation. I'm not aware of that. Maybe I'm just missing that. But I think this is a pretty robust correlation that we are getting. And actually, I think I'm pretty happy about that, because it means that actually temperature plays a really, really key role on how the rocks are deforming. And the question, the point here is that the GPS network, sorry, they have used, I don't know if I go faster like this, the GPS network they have used for computing this map is amazing. It's just amazing. So it has a lot of spatial resolution. So I doubt, I mean, so this signal is pretty solid, and I am sure if we were to perform similar studies in other areas, we should get similar correlations. I'm just wondering if we have the data, particularly for this comparison.
To have all this different data in one place.
Yes, because for the thermal field, I can build a thermal model with, let's say, basic data, and we can already get the first order control, because this is what happens in the Caribbean. We really had a challenging region because it was almost no high resolution data. And nevertheless, we follow and we found other implications for seismogenesis as well. So the thermal model is not the problem. The problem is that you need high resolution data, at least in a small region, so you can capture this spatial variation. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I have more chocolates here.
Questions.
Oh, more questions. Chocolates and questions.
Consider the food production of the different cultures in the modeling?
Yes.
North Sierra Nevada, it's uranic, basically. So
Yes. Actually, that's one of the main inputs I am getting from the community model. Let me go here. Is that they have done a pretty good job in the definition of the different lithologies that are, let's say, correspond to each of these terrains. And I am actually using these transitions also in my model to populate the radiogenic heat production and thermal conductivity. So I am following that. So I have pretty much like a cube of thermal properties that varies both at depth and spatially, following that. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Well, thanks a lot. It was a real pleasure to